We all differ in the quantity of sleep we need. What's important for everyone, though, is our quality of sleep. In order to reach a deep sleep state, your body temperature needs to adjust, and finding ways to activate that sleep switch can help increase your levels of deep sleep. That's where Chili Sleep comes in. Chili Sleep makes the Oola and Cube sleep systems, hydro-powered, temperature-controlled mattress toppers that fit over your existing mattress to provide your ideal sleep temperature. And they're even designed so that you and your partner can each have your own temperature settings. Head over to chilisleep.com/getsleepy to learn more and check out a special offer available exclusively for Get Sleepy listeners and only for a limited time. That's Chili, CHILI, sleep.com/getsleepy to take advantage of our exclusive discount and wake up refreshed every day. Welcome to Get Sleepy, the podcast where we listen, we relax, and we get sleepy. I'm your host, Thomas. Thanks for joining us. I hope you're doing well and that your week is off to a bright start. A long time ago, before Scotland and England were part of the United Kingdom, the two countries spent many years battling one another. Several brave Scots fought hard to establish Scotland's autonomy, but it took an especially determined leader to defeat the mighty English kings once and for all. Tonight we'll venture back to the 12 and 1300s to learn about the Scottish king whose legacy far outlasted his reign, Robert the Bruce. This story is the winner of our most recent social media poll, and next week I'll be reading the runner-up. Thanks again to everyone who cast a vote, and if you'd like to take part in our future polls, be sure to follow Get Sleepy on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. You can find us by searching Get Sleepy Pod, all as one word, or there are links to all of our pages in the show notes. A big thanks to tonight's sponsor, Nutrafol. In a time where self-care is more important than ever, from stress to digestion, multiple things can impact your hair growth. Nutrafol is physician-formulated to be 100% drug-free. They use natural, clinically effective botanicals for better hair growth through whole-body health. In clinical studies, Nutrafol users saw thicker, stronger hair growth in just 3 to 6 months. You can grow thicker, healthier hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com and using promo code GETSLEEPY to save $15 off your first month's subscription. This is their best offer available anywhere, and it's only available to US customers for a limited time. Plus, you'll get free shipping on every order. Get $15 off at Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol, and use promo code GETSLEEPY for hair as strong as you are. So, it's time to make yourself nice and comfortable now. Find whatever position feels right for you. And just spend a moment appreciating the comfort and coziness of your bed. Feel the areas of contact between your body and the mattress below. Notice where the weight of your body sinks a little deeper, the subtle movement of the breath. And starting at the top of your head, scan your attention through the body, acknowledging any sense of tension or unease as you go. As you scan down through the face and neck and into the shoulders, feel free to pause for a moment should you find any tension lingering there. And if so, then simply breathe deeply 2 or 3 times, inviting an essence of calm to wash over your face, neck, and shoulders. Then, when you're ready, continue to scan down the arms and into the hands, back into your diaphragm, your chest and upper back, your stomach and lower back. If any tension arises, breathe the essence of calm into those areas. Follow the attention through your hips, your upper legs, the knees, and the lower legs, into your ankles, the tops of your feet, the soles of your feet, and finally your toes. Breathe in that essence of calm and let everything completely relax. It's time to hear our story now, so you can just continue on your way to sleep, and I'll delve into a bit of Scottish history. Robert the Bruce reigned as King of Scotland from 1306 until his passing in 1329 at the age of 54. While he had a storied life, history remembers him most for his courage in delivering the Scottish people freedom from the English crown. And though his journey to the throne was far from simple, his bravery has become legendary. Robert was born on July 11th, 1274, at Turnberry Castle, his mother's ancestral home. Little remains of the building these days, but at the time, it was a commanding stone structure bordered by the Irish Sea on 3 sides. As his mother held him close, listening to the sound of the gentle waves just beyond the walls, one can only wonder if she imagined the future he had in front of him. Robert and his younger siblings were born into a life of great privilege. Their father was the Earl of Carrick, and their paternal grandfather was the Lord of Annandale. Many historians believe the children would have benefited from an extensive education that included philosophy, languages, and music, as well as swordplay and jousting. Perhaps these last two endeavours helped shape Robert into the warrior king he would one day become. He grew up during the reign of King Alexander III, which was a relatively peaceful time for Scotland. However, fortunes throughout Europe were starting to turn in what is now recognised as the late medieval period. Across the continent, political rivalries were worsening, and many of the gilded class were keen to shore up their power. Upon King Alexander's death in 1286, the crown was passed to his young granddaughter, Margaret, Maid of Norway. But in 1290, during a voyage to Scotland, Margaret also died, leaving the country without a natural heir. Governance fell to the Guardians of Scotland, a small collective of the gentle class, tasked with overseeing the nation's fortunes. Soon, noblemen from many lands were laying claim to the empty throne, in what would ultimately be known as the Great Cause. In all, 13 individuals bid for the Scottish crown, including Robert's grandfather, the 5th Lord of Annandale. Annandale himself was the descendant of a former king of Scotland. But the Guardians believed others also had a valid argument for why they should be the nation's royal leader. The Guardians of Scotland were conscious that the decision that lay before them could undo the order and economic security the country had enjoyed for so long. So, they sent word south across the border to the King of England, Edward I. They asked him to arbitrate as they chose a new monarch. Edward, often referred to as Longshanks because he was remarkably tall, agreed to help the Guardians. But he had his own conditions. He told them he wanted to be recognised as Lord Paramount of Scotland, giving him vast control over the country and its affairs. The Guardians refused, noting that only the right and proper Scottish king could grant such a status. But Longshanks was an expert in the law, however controversial it may have been. He understood that he had an ultimate say over who should take the throne, because there were so many contenders for the crown. And so, in 1292, Longshanks identified John Balliol as the next King of Scotland. He had been one of Annandale's most prominent rivals. Upon learning of Longshanks' decision, Annandale resigned his lordship and ceded the title to his son, who was Robert's father. In turn, Robert himself was named the Earl of Carrick. Though it's unknown whether Robert understood this at the time, the title changes meant he would one day be eligible to claim Scotland's throne. But in the meantime, Balliol was now king. And Longshanks saw an opportunity to wield his power and influence. He held enough sway to affirm his own role as Lord Paramount of Scotland. Over the following years, Longshanks undermined Balliol's position repeatedly, and ultimately he worked to diminish the reverence of the Scottish crown itself. Many in Scotland were angered to see the English king decide that his position superseded Balliol's. He went as far as to override decisions that many believed were sovereign to the Scottish crown. Longshanks treated the country like a vassal state, and Balliol like one of his nobles. If this were the case, Scotland and its leader would have an obligation to help the English monarch should he call on them for aid. Their relationship was strained further in 1294, when Longshanks demanded Balliol provide money and troops to support England's war against France. At the time, Scotland and France had strong links because of trade, and the Scottish lords weren't in a hurry to go to war with their long-established trading partner. The lords refused to abide by Longshanks' wishes. Instead, they formed a new group of 12 guardians. Collectively, they decided that Scotland should not join England's war, and instead should sign a treaty with the French. Scottish messengers were dispatched to France to negotiate. In February 1296, the two countries signed the Auld Alliance. It was a mutual aid agreement, meaning that if France were attacked by England, Scotland would come to their aid. The same would be true if England invaded Scotland. France would be obliged to help. Longshanks placed the blame on Balliol for not keeping the Scottish lords in line. Now in his early 20s, Bruce followed his father's lead in siding with Longshanks. Together, they marched with the English army in what would become known as the First War of Scottish Independence. To this day, historians are still unsure why the Bruces, led by Robert the Elder, were loyal to the English king. But for Longshanks, such support undoubtedly encouraged him and his troops. The Scots attacked Carlisle in what is considered the first battle of the war. At the time, the area was under control of the Bruce family. Longshanks sent an army to invade Scotland and attacked the border town of Berwick-upon-Tweed on the North Sea coast between Newcastle and Edinburgh. This set in motion a larger conflict. In late April 1296, Longshanks' army seized Dunbar Castle on the southwest coast. they pushed through southern Scotland and laid siege to Edinburgh Castle in July. Then they continued to take other significant castles around the country until Balliol and the other Scottish nobles surrendered. Soon after, Balliol abdicated the Scottish throne. He was held in the Tower of London for a time, before being allowed to leave for France in July 1299. The Scottish people were without a leader once more. With Balliol gone, Longshanks gained the loyalty of many of Scotland's nobles. This allowed him to establish ultimate control over the nation. But for others, the fight for independence was nowhere near over. One of those people was Andrew de Moray, the son of a Scottish landowner. In early 1297, he was imprisoned in England by Longshanks' army, and even though he was far from home, de Moray refused to give up his deeply held belief that Scots should rule Scotland. By May of that year, de Moray had managed to escape. He quickly made his way back to Scotland, returning to his ancestral home in the north of the country. Once there, he publicly denounced Longshanks' control over the country and its affairs. There was already a sizable group of Scots mustering forces in the event that another battle was on the horizon. But de Moray inspired many more to heed his call and challenge the English army. Meanwhile, in a different corner of the country, another well-known Scot was also stoking rebellion against English rule. William Wallace called on his countrymen to join the uprising. Soon, de Moray's and Wallace's revolts led to a series of attacks against the occupying forces and their allies. This rebellion incensed Longshanks, leading him to send more English troops to Scotland. But Wallace and de Moray continued to fight back, and the ensuing battles would define an era known as the Wars of Scottish Independence. For Robert, it was a troubling time. While he was loyal to his father, he could see how many ordinary people were joining forces with both Wallace and de Moray. Still, his father had sworn allegiance to the English king, and so the young man had much to consider. Some historians believe that Robert had fallen in with the allies of his grandfather instead. It's impossible to know precisely how the young man felt, but we know he was watching many of his fellow Scots band together to demand freedom from his nation's occupiers. In 1297, Robert visited with Bishop Wishart, a much revered figure and good friend of his grandfather Annandale. Wishart listened to Robert's concerns, understanding the connections his family had to the English crown. But Wishart believed Longshanks' hold over Scotland was coming to an end. He encouraged Robert to follow his heart and join Wallace and de Moray in their efforts to push back the occupying armies. Encouraged by Wishart's words, Robert took up arms against Longshanks' men. In September of that year, Wallace joined with de Moray, and together they led a force to beat back the English troops in what would come to be known as the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Scottish and English soldiers faced each other across the timber bridge, which spanned the River Forth. The structure was just wide enough to carry 2 horseback riders at a time. As the English army crossed, Wallace and his men watched in anticipation. Eventually, more than 2,000 troops crossed over to face the Scots, which is when the battle began. Wallace knew how to use a certain formation in order to create a traffic jam of sorts on the bridge. It collapsed, cutting the English army off from reinforcements. By the end, the Scots were victorious. Following the Battle of Stirling Bridge, the story of William Wallace's bravery began to spread. In 1297, he was named a Guardian of Scotland and would go down in the history books for his legendary actions. But Longshanks was incensed by Wallace's rising fame and plotted to take him on once more. In April of the following year, Longshanks sent thousands of soldiers north of the border again, determined to draw Wallace and his legions into another battle. But the Scots thought it better to wait the king out, believing his troops would soon run low on supplies. Many of the foot soldiers were likely Welsh conscripts. The morale of the forces was low, given the riots and rebellions that had broken out among them. Soon enough, Wallace and his men were proven correct, and Longshanks' army made preparations to leave Scotland. But before they'd retreated, the English king received word that Wallace and his troops were laying low in the country's east near Falkirk. So Longshanks ordered his troops to the region to engage Wallace and the rebels. Soon, Wallace and his men found themselves bravely fighting Longshanks' soldiers once more. But unlike at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, Wallace's strategy failed him. Ultimately, he had to retreat to escape capture. In the wake of defeat, Wallace's abilities as a military leader were in doubt. He resigned as a Guardian of Scotland just a year after taking up the role. With Wallace gone, Robert felt a sense of duty to help lead his country. He stepped forward to take Wallace's place as the Guardian in 1298. However, he was joined by John Comyn, also known as John the Red, a man whose own history would eventually be bound up with Robert's forever. The Comyn clan had a long history of disputes with the Bruces, so perhaps it was inevitable that John the Red and Robert the Bruce would be politically opposed, and though they served side by side as guardians, they both had differing visions for Scotland's future. John the Red was a nephew of the former Scottish king, John Balliol. He had continued to fight against Longshanks on his exiled uncle's behalf. Robert, however, believed Scotland needed a more decisive leader, and was open about his own ambitions to someday become king. Still, the two men tried to find a way to work together for the good of their country. But confrontations and disputes marred their relationship. By 1305, Longshank's dominance over Scotland was without doubt. Over the years, he had invaded on multiple occasions, taking control of land and property, including Turnberry Castle, Robert's childhood home. That summer, John the Red made a secret pact with Robert, agreeing to support his claim to the throne should he lead a successful uprising against Longshanks. But by August, William Wallace had been captured in Glasgow by a knight loyal to the English king. He was swiftly taken to London, where he met his end. With the Scottish rebellion in disarray, Longshanks subsequently ordered Robert to hand over control of much of his property, including a castle in Kildrummy. The dream of an independent Scotland seemed to be over, and mistrust had begun to churn among the rebels. In February 1306, Robert and several of those loyal to him met with John the Red in the chapel of Greyfriars Monastery in Dumfries. They discussed the events of the preceding months, but soon an argument broke out. Many historians believe that John said he didn't think Robert should be king, and questions remain about John possibly being secretly loyal to Longshanks. But one thing is for sure: John the Red was mortally wounded in the confrontation. Robert and his men left Greyfriars and travelled to Dumfries Castle. The English soldiers stationed there quickly surrendered. Next, the group headed north on horseback to Glasgow, where Bishop Wishart absolved Robert of any wrongdoing. Wishart then commanded the rest of Scotland's clergy to support his bid to lead the nation. Weeks later, on March 25th, 1306, Bishop William de Lamberton crowned Robert the Bruce as Scotland's king. When Longshanks got word, he led another invasion, determined to stamp out the rebellion one final time. What followed was a months-long battle between the English and Scottish crowns, Robert was determined not to let Longshanks dominate Scotland any longer, while the English king was determined to control both thrones. In June 1306, Longshanks sent soldiers to attack Robert's men near the Scottish village of Methven. He had given the order that the Scottish forces should be finished once and for all. As Robert and his soldiers made camp, they came under a surprise attack. Outnumbered, Robert had to flee, leaving many of his most faithful supporters behind. He disappeared into the night, along with the dream of giving Scotland its independence. Following the battle, Robert the Bruce was neither seen nor heard from for many months. And although there has been plenty of speculation over the centuries as to what happened to him, to this day, nobody knows where he disappeared. Some believe Robert travelled on horseback to the northwest Scottish coast, accompanied by a handful of loyal friends. There, it's thought they might have transferred to small boats and sailed to the Hebrides, a group of windswept islands in the Irish Sea. Legend has it that Robert decided this was the safest place to be, far from Longshanks and his army. The Hebrides were also ruled by Lady Christina of the Isles, a noblewoman to whom he was related. Perhaps he and his men established a settlement nestled along the rolling green hills of the distant islands, overlooking white sand beaches and rolling blue seas. One famous story tells of how Robert hunkered in a wooden shed on a stormy day, tired but unable to rest. Wrapped in a blanket, he listened to the rain drum on the shelter, thinking about all he'd left behind. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a little spider scurrying along a wooden beam above his head. Curious, he watched as it stopped in place and then elegantly descended its silk thread. Once at the end, the spider started to sway back and forth, building up momentum, readying to swing across to another beam. The spider sailed through the air, aiming for its target, but missed the beam by just a hair's breadth. It swayed around and around at the end of its silk until it came to a stop. Then, to Robert's surprise, the spider began to move once more, preparing to try again. He witnessed the spider try several times to reach the beam, only to fail over and over again. Then, he watched the spider try one last time, taking its biggest swing so far. Finally, the little creature landed itself on the beam and anchored its silk thread. By not giving up, it had achieved its goal. Inspired by the spider, Bruce left the shed and gathered his men. He told them what he had witnessed and realized they also must not give up. If they wanted Scotland to be truly free, they must be like the spider and try again. Whether the story is true or not, an amazing thing did happen. Robert the Bruce and his companions re-emerged in early 1307 and launched a new campaign against Longshank's soldiers. Robert now had a better understanding of the country's wild and rugged landscape, and he used it to his advantage to surprise the English soldiers in the south when they least expected it. Over the following years, Robert established a brave army and took on the English in a series of battles across the countryside. Soon enough, he had captured much of the nation's strongholds, including Edinburgh Castle and his ancestral home of Turnberry Castle. In the early 1310s, Longshanks had passed away. His son, Edward II, took the throne and picked up his father's battles for Scotland's rule. But Edward had little military experience to fall back on. In the summer of 1314, Edward decided to wage his largest attack yet. He gathered an army of as many as 20,000 soldiers. But Robert's men subsequently took control of Stirling Castle and were now negotiating its full surrender. Edward decided to march his troops to Stirling to prevent the takeover. But Robert was not afraid. Even though he had an army of just 6,000, he was determined to stop Edward's men before they could get to the castle. On June 23rd, Scotland's army intercepted Edward and his troops on the banks of Bannockburn, a stream in the east of the country. The surrounding marshland proved a challenge for the English king and his troops, especially as they didn't expect Robert and his soldiers to appear from the hills above. Edward and his forces retreated from the first engagement. One of his knights defected to Robert's side and told him where the rest of the English were camped. The next day, the Scots launched a surprise attack. Humiliated by the defeat, Edward returned to England, leaving Robert to take complete control of Stirling Castle. And though Scotland and England would clash many more times yet, the English reign over the country had ended. Robert the Bruce had finally given the Scottish people what they had long dreamt of: freedom.